And I'm wrestling with it, I don't think. That works across disciplines as well. We know about the body, we know maybe we know about the soul. Nothing else. And we lost it. And I think this is a struggle.
Noticing it everywhere. So in German, spiritual science.
Yeah. Same in Dutch, yeah. I've been in the Netherlands. Occasionally they show.
This is what Hegel meant by he wrote. When Hegel wrote the phenomenology of consideration, it's basically a Christian or nothing in Hegel's writing contradicts Christianity. The basic idea is that we are not an accident, that we are led by the Spirit of the Holy Spirit without knowing, driving us forward. That's the basic idea. Also, ever since Hegel raised that explains the world. Everybody went to phenomenology or I don't know. There's no Hegel was showing it. So long with the soul. But otherwise, it's actually only mathematical. Yeah, but the spirit of great.
That's what I see. Brilliant system. Wonderfully. Can be so easily misused.
Books I read about Shaw was so much Jewish community abroad. You wrote a book how to check because, for example, they have to do it somehow the original language not clear that the term that wouldn't make sense to the insurance. You know, in the PowerPoint presentation, they were great training, they would be able to do options. And this is exactly what we're doing. This evil. But then, my book is not looking at spirit. Okay, good job. I'm looking forward to hear you. No, tak vidíš, všude povídám o tom.
Vážení přátelé Izraele, vážená paní velvyslankyně, vážení poslanci, poslankyně, vážené senátorky a senátoři, vážení hosté z ciziny, daleké i blízké, zde daleko je to Andrew Turner from Holland, to je jiný welcome. Jste blízké, to Petr Švec ze Slovenska, vítejte Petře. Je tady ještě někdo z nějakého na tento slavnostní okamžik, bych vás informoval, že v této místnosti a v tento čas se začínají odehrávat přelomové události. To, co se děje v Izraeli a to, co se děje teď v České republice, má velmi zajímavou souvislost. Proč to říkám? Ten strašný masakr, který začal 6. a 7. října tohoto roku, vyvolal obrovskou vlnu nenávisti, zděšení a vzdorů po celém slušném světě. Ale díky tomu, že v České republice už se po 3 leta připravovala půda na to, aby přinejmenším poslanecké sněmovně bylo jasno, pokud se týká všechno České ambasády do Jeruzaléma, a právě tento strašný okamžik pro Izrael a pro celý svět nakonec celoživotnou urychlil a akceleroval. A v úterý 11. října, 4 dny potom, co ta strašná věc se udělala v oblasti Gazy, Česká poslanecká sněmovna bez výjimky jednohlasně přijala usnesení ve svém 3. bodě vyzývající vládu, aby ve vhodný čas přesunula Českou ambasádu do Jeruzaléma. Nikde ve světě, pokud víme, se ta nenávist, to zděšení, ta polova neseklo tedy do konkrétního činu. Stalo se to pouze v tomto parlamentu a jsme za to naším. Je to jediná událost, která návazně umožnila, aby jsme v tom dnešním den pokračovali. A opět tam byl přípravný krok. A sice před toho roku jsme se sešli na půdě parlamentní a v tomto případě Senátu, kdy byla přijata Parliamentary deklarace, která hovořila o tom, v 7 bodech, že každý stát na světě mimo Izraele má právo na určení svého hlavního města.
Except of Israel. And if we want to respect this rule of thumb of international law, that every single country has the sovereign right, we want it, and we want this right to be recognized Israel, to choose Jerusalem. Hence, the last point of the Prague Declaration from June this year, it actually stated that we call on the European states and their parliaments respectively to appeal on their governments to relocate their embassies to Jerusalem, because we are a hand that extends to Europe from Czechia. And why do I say this is a history-forming moment? Today, as we speak, we shall actually extend our hand to parliaments, not only to European countries, but also to the countries around the world. The Prague Declaration of the Israeli Alliance Foundation, which will be read out by Mr. Janulík, member of Parliament, who's the chairperson of the French group. This declaration is actually being transmitted to the rest of the world. And this is a truly historical moment, and it is a great honor for us, and we are very grateful for that. In order for this declaration and this appeal to be justified, we have invited world-renowned lawyers, both from the Czech Republic as well as from abroad, in order to reverse the general imperative that has been maintained by the World 14, which says that the relocation of embassies to Jerusalem is not correct from the legal point of view. We are of different opinion, and also the lawyers who are here with us are of the same opinion. Hence, through this conference, we would like to present their opinions, and not only they will actually introduce you to their opinions, but those of you who would be interested, you will be provided with a full version of their arguments in favor of relocating the embassies, in order to give you and the others who are watching us online, be it in Europe, be it in Czechia, and the rest of the world, we want to give you legal background and legal documents for you to say that the relocation of embassies to Jerusalem is not against the international law. And I do apologize for making it a rather lengthy introduction, but I think it is important for you to know why do we meet here, and we are very grateful for you to taking place. And now let me actually ask Her Excellency the Ambassador of the State of Israel to give us a few remarks and introduce us to the situation. Thank you. Friends, we don't do it very often, but I have to congratulate myself all the time, and I do it because when I was making the decision which diplomatic mission will be my next, I opted for Czechia. Since the tragedy that occurred on the 7th of October, I actually realized how good this choice was. We have great support here. At the same time, we can see that the society here and the politicians are steps ahead. Our today's seminar is a sheer example. While we are still consumed with war and trying to make sure our hostages are returned back, we are discussing here the relocation of embassy to Jerusalem. Therefore, I'd like to express my gratitude for choosing the work in this country. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And as I have already said, the Israeli Allies Foundation is the body which this declaration and this conference will be spread throughout the world. Therefore, I'd like to ask the president of this Israeli foundation for his contribution, which was actually provided as a video presentation.
Hello, blessings from Jerusalem. I'm really excited about today's event in the Czech Republic. It's about time the Czech Republic moves their embassy to Jerusalem, and we see that that process
blessings from Jerusalem.
I want to
I'm really
thank
excited about
the
today's event in the
chairman of the Czech
Czech
Republic.
Republic. It's about time the Czech Republic
moves their embassy to Jerusalem, and we see that that process has already began. I want to thank our director and the chairman of the Czech Republic Israel Allies Caucus for their leadership. I also want to thank our director of the Israel Allies Foundation Europe, Leo Van Duesberg, and of course, Andrew Tucker for helping with this whole process. Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel since the time of King David. When the modern state of Israel was founded, Jerusalem was made the capital of Israel by Israel. And every other country in the world gets to say where their capital is. And this is the only time in history that countries don't recognize that. And we've seen bold action from the United States, from Kosovo, from Papua New Guinea, from Honduras, from Guatemala. But what we're looking for is for countries in the European Union, like the Czech Republic, to finally move their embassy to Jerusalem and declare that Jerusalem is the undivided capital of Israel. We want to thank you all for what you're doing in the Czech Republic today. You've already started the process. And the Prague statement that was released in the Israel Allies Foundation Europe conference in June has become a global standard for how countries need to act and speak out for the issue of Jerusalem. So today's event is something that we're looking at very carefully to see how it progresses through Europe and throughout the world. I want to thank all of you, both Jews and Christians, who've come together for this important event, and say that it's us, Jews and Christians, who believe in these values as we do. It's the source of our strength, the reason for our success and prosperity, and the foundation of the Judeo-Christian civilization that we share. We must all come together to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our might, as we're commanded to do. And both Jews and Christians will get God's blessings together. Thank you again for all you're doing, and I hope to be with all of you when the Czech Republic finally opens their embassy in Jerusalem, hopefully later this year.
Janulík a mezi parlamentní skupinou spojenců Izraele, které poslanecké sněmovně vede pan poslanec Miloslav Janulík, je v tom, že zatímco skupina Přátelé Izraele udržuje dvojstranné styky, v tomto konkrétním případě mezi Českou republikou a Izraelem, tak skupina spojenců nejenom, že tyto styky má, ale má i síť dalších poslanců v Evropě 17, posvětuje 53, s kterými síťově spolupracuje a navzájem se informuje. Proto taky můžeme tu pražskou deklaraci skrze tuto síť šířit do Evropy a do světa. Rozdíl je trošku v tom, že ta skupina spojenců Izraele byla založena v Knesetu izraelském, kdy si izraelští zákonodárci uvědomili, že ti poslanci, kteří mají vztah k Izraeli na hlubší duchovní bázi, ať už jsou to křesťané nebo židé, představují významnou složku jejich spojenců. A proto byla založena taková skupina v Knesetu pro spolupráci s křesťany, poslanci, až se to postupně vyvinulo do takovýchto rozměrů. A v poslanecké sněmovně byla založena skupina 2020, skupina spojenců pod vedením pana poslance Janulíka, a nyní tato skupina pokračuje dál už v jiném složení této poslanecké sněmovny, ale stále za vedení pana poslance Janulíka, kterému tímto předávám slovo.
Děkuji, dovolte mě taky, abych vás
I would like to welcome you all at an international conference. I would like to express my thanks to Mr. Sedláček. Without him, it wouldn't be possible to meet here today. And the reason why we are present is the title, Embassies in Jerusalem and International Law. I've been my third election period in Parliament, and we have been working on it continuously so that the embassies really move to Israel, to Jerusalem, so that we prove that we are allies. What happened in October? Then we said, when else? When not now? Because we can't assist friends in Israel. They can help themselves better than anyone else. But this, we believe, the tangible symbol and visible symbol and spiritual support at such a tough moment for the state of Israel and all Israelis. That's why we have met here, so that we could show the arguments to the ones who try to say, we might, but even the ones who have been signing the declaration when we have been prompting the government to do it. Paradoxically, now they are members of the parliament, and I still perceive it that those are just excuses, making it trivial. So I believe that we will be hearing here really vital arguments so that we could show why it's possible, so that the quasi-arguments and excuses can be really just swiped away, so that it will be really in line with the Prague Declaration, and I will be mentioning it in the conclusion so that we could all support it. Thank you very much. Before next presentation from Amsterdam, and Pavel Žáček didn't come yet, but he is on his way, so he just had a colliding program at the same time, so Mr. Žáček will definitely join us later, and he will have a great presentation because he came recently from his visit to Israel, and it will be worth it. Just the program will be rescheduled so that you will know to have something to look forward to. Next presentation from Amsterdam, Director of the Israeli Alliance for Europe.
Esteemed members of Parliament, respected ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to Mr. Janulík, Chairman of the Israel Allies Caucus in the Czech Parliament, Mr. Pavel Žáček, Chairman of the Security Committee in the Czech Parliament, and Mr. Karel Sedláček, IAF Country Director for the Czech Republic and Chairman of the Czech Friends of Israel Association, for their commendable efforts in organizing this significant event. On June the 7th, 40 members of Parliament, IAF Country Directors and member of the IAF Christian Advisory Board convened in Prague for our European Policy Summit. At the initiative of our Czech partners, we engaged in discussions that led to the development of the Prague Declaration. This declaration urges the parliaments of European countries and the European Parliament to adopt resolutions recognizing Jerusalem as the indivisible capital of Israel and to relocate their embassies to Jerusalem. This statement was officially endorsed at the IAF Europe's Chairman's meeting during the European Policy Summit. We are delighted that the Czech Republic implemented the principles of the Prague Declaration and passed a resolution on October the 10th calling on the government to move the embassy of the Czech Republic to Jerusalem in due course. Now the Czech Republic is hosting this conference to present legal arguments supporting the validity under international law of transferring embassies to Jerusalem. We hope that the Czech Republic will be the first country from the European Union that will move their embassies. And I am sure that if Czech Republic will move their embassies, that other countries will follow them. As mentioned by Josh Reinstein, this conference marks the start of an international campaign to encourage countries to relocate their embassies to Jerusalem. The information and outcomes from this conference are therefore crucial and can provide valuable assistance. I am pleased to witness Andrew Tucker from the Hague Initiative for International Cooperation as one of the speakers at the conference. Based on the juridical briefing paper from Think, we will develop a concise policy paper directed at legislators worldwide, assisting them in advocating for the relocation of their embassies. Furthermore, based on the principles of the Prague Declaration, we will draft an international declaration for discussion among the Caucasus worldwide. I firmly believe that what has been initiated in the Czech Republic is the beginning of an international movement of relocating the embassies to Jerusalem. A movement that demonstrates solidarity with Israel, which will offer significant encouragement, especially during this challenging time faced by Israel. I wish you a productive conference.
I believe this issue of Jerusalem
in the international community is one of the core issues of our time. And it's challenging us about the way we see international law and the international community as a whole. The way we deal with the Jewish people, with the state of Israel, and specifically with the city of Jerusalem tells us a lot about ourselves. And therefore it tells us about the international community that we want to be. We're now living 70 years longer since the Shoah, since the creation of the New World Order that was built in San Francisco in the United Nations. And I believe we've seen the creation of a system that has been turned very much against the people that it was designed to protect. The system that came out of the Second World War was built on the ashes of the Shoah. And it was very much built on Judeo-Christian values. But we have seen over the course of the decades a system that has been twisted and distorted to suit the interests of those who actually are opposed to those very Judeo-Christian values that we seek to foster. So I want to share with you just a few thoughts that come out. We've done a study on the legal aspects of moving embassies to Jerusalem, and I don't want to go into all the legal details. I just want to draw out some of the key fundamental issues, because I think, as Karel mentioned, what we're doing is actually going very much against
the tide. We are seeking to oppose a system. Everybody, 99.9% of the world, tell us that you cannot move your embassy to Jerusalem, and there are very good legal reasons why that is the case. So we have to be standing in a very strong ground if we want to oppose that and present a justifiable and credible set of arguments about why that is not the case. And to some extent it's a technical legal story, but I think it's much more fundamental than that. We have to recognize that there are at least 3 layers of complexity when it comes to the city of Jerusalem. There's the religious sensitivities concerning the Jewish, Christian and Muslim holy places of Jerusalem. We've seen that over the millennia. Nations have fought over Jerusalem. We in Europe have been at the center of world wars, wars that have been fought about the holy places in Jerusalem. Think of the Crimean War, for example, in the 19th century. Then we have the political or religious claims concerning the city, and we note that the Arab Muslim claims to Jerusalem concern the city as a whole. They deny any Israeli claims to sovereignty over the city. You just have to read the Charter of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, the OIC, which specifically talks about the liberation of Jerusalem, not East Jerusalem, but the whole city of Jerusalem. And then at the third level, we have the relationship between Israel and the Palestinians, as reflected in the Oslo Accords. That's a very complex relationship, which goes even beyond the religious and the political. We have another challenge, and that is that international law itself has become extremely complex, even over the last decades, with the growth of international humanitarian law, international criminal law, and most importantly, international human rights law. So for most lawyers today, law is about human rights. When the UN system was built to protect, amongst others, the Jewish people of the state of Israel, it was about states. It was about sovereignty of nations. Today it's all about the individual. It's about the protection of the individual against the state, which is seen to be hostile to the individual. So we're very skeptical about states, especially about the state of Israel. Nevertheless, legal systems are only as good as the spirit of those who use them. As I said in a conversation just earlier, the Germans had a very good legal system in the Second World War, and they used it brilliantly. The UN is a brilliant legal system, but if it's misused and distorted, we undermine the very essence of what law is. So, in our view, we think there are 5 basic principles that really we need to turn to when we look at how law really applies to the city of Jerusalem. First of all, the principle of sovereign equality, which underlies the United Nations. States are free to exercise their sovereignty, subject only to specific constraints imposed by public international law. And all states should be treated equally. You cannot have a system where one state is constantly picked out for special treatment, and that is the case in Israel. Secondly, the principle of state responsibility does mean that states, every state, is responsible for internationally wrongful acts. This means states may not knowingly aid or assist other states to commit wrongful acts. Thirdly, we have a distinction between law and politics. This is one of the difficult issues about international law. But I believe now more than ever, it is essential that we have a sound and rigorous legal analysis before we even think about the political, ethical, or moral considerations of any conflict or situation. You only have to look at the media reporting concerning the Gaza conflict, and people use the language of law to condemn Israel's disproportionate use of force. But they're not talking about the law at all. They're talking emotionally, responding to pictures of babies and children in hospitals being killed. But we use law to suit our moral or ethical preferences. And this is a misuse of law. We have to distinguish between law and politics. We'll come back to that when we think of the Security Council. It's bizarre when you think about it. And just in recent days, we have resolutions of the UN General Assembly and Security Council which fail to condemn the terrorism of Hamas for what it is. And they turn immediately to criticizing Israel and constraining Israel in its use of force. We've become unable to see the difference between good and evil. And I think this is something we need to turn back to. The fourth point is about the role of the United Nations. The United Nations is not a law-making institution. It cannot make binding determinations on legal issues that are in dispute. That is not the role of the United Nations. The International Court of Justice has a role to play. It's now considering an advisory opinion on, amongst other things, the legal status of the Holy City of Jerusalem. Right now, in The Hague, this is the issue before the court. It'll be easy to see where the court comes down. I'm not very optimistic about it. But even the court has an advisory role only. It cannot impose upon Israel or any other state a decision which determines its legal status or legal interest in a binding way. The fifth principle, I believe, is terribly important. It's called the intertemporal principle. Intertemporal principle. That means you can't keep making up the rules as you go along. You can't reinvent history. When we judge Israel for its actions in 1948 or 1967 or 1980, we apply the law as it was applicable at that time. We don't suddenly think up our new system of human rights and apply it retroactively to Israel. That is not law, that is politics. So we have to be very careful that when we judge Israel's actions, and this is true, I think, of the Security Council resolutions in 1980, condemning Israel's reunification of Israel, of Jerusalem as the capital. The Security Council was attempting to rewrite history. So these five principles must determine the way we look at law when considering Jerusalem. Now from there, and I only have time just to raise a few of the issues that come out, but the fundamental principle of international law when it comes to embassies, to diplomatic missions, is defined in the Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations. And that is that sovereign states decide amongst themselves where diplomatic missions are placed. Right, so this is an issue between the State of Israel and the Czech Republic, in this case as it might be, to decide where the embassy of the Czech Republic will be placed for Israel. That might be in Israel, it may not even be in Israel. There are embassies that are not within the territory of the receiving state. But this is a question of sovereignty as between the receiving and the sending states. Now, of course, in doing so, you cannot aid or abet an internationally wrongful act. Okay, so neither Israel nor the Czech Republic can be using the question of diplomatic embassies, missions in Jerusalem to promote some kind of act of the State of Israel which is illegal, which is contrary to international law. So that's the issue here. That's the issue here. Is Israel done in 1948, in 1967, or in 1980, the key moments in history? Has it been acting contrary to international law? So if you read the Security Council resolutions 476, 478, of July 1980, you're led to believe that Israel has committed certain internationally illegal acts. First, it has acquired territory by force, contrary to the prohibition on acquisition of territory by force. That's the first reason that is given. Secondly, it says Israel must end the occupation of Arab territories. So these are the reasons why states were compelled to move their embassies from Jerusalem, right? Because Israel was somehow infringing the rights of the Arab peoples to the territory of Jerusalem. That's the second reason. The third reason is that changing the character of the city is somehow infringing the law of occupation. Okay, so these are occupied territories, Jerusalem, at least part of it, it is argued, and therefore putting your embassy there is somehow assisting Israel to continue this occupation, which must be brought to an end, and to change the character of the city is illegal. So these are the three issues we have to deal with. There's another issue, it's about the holy places, the idea that Israeli sovereignty is somehow infringing the Muslim and Christian holy places. Well, if there's one period in history when holy places have been the most protected in Jerusalem, it's since 1949, and certainly since 1967 with the Old City. Jews can't even worship on the Temple Mount. So Israel is preventing its own civilians in the interest of the Muslim world from visiting the Temple Mount, which is most holy to the Jewish people. So Israel is going to its utmost to protect the rights of Christians and Muslims. It's not perfect by any means, but it's certainly better than the Jordanian occupation, when every sign, every synagogue, every Jewish place of worship was utterly destroyed. And Israel has faithfully restored the Jewish places of worship. So, two main things, I think, to draw out of all of this. The first, we need to understand that the State of Israel was created in 1948. Okay, it was built upon the system of the Mandate for Palestine. The Mandate for Palestine envisaged the creation of the Jewish homeland in Palestine, included Judea, Samaria, and Jerusalem. There's no doubt whatsoever that Jerusalem was intended to be part of the Jewish homeland. Nobody considered division of Jerusalem. Not even in 1947 with the partition plan. Jerusalem was to be an international city, but not divided. So it's only more recently that, since the Jordanian illegal attack on the State of Israel, that the idea of separating, dividing the city has come into place. So Jerusalem is very much at the core, because of the Jewish connection with Jerusalem, which has always been, or almost always, primarily a dominantly Jewish city. In the 1870s, for example, the majority of the citizens of Jerusalem were Jewish. And that was the case through most of the Mandate period. So when the State of Israel was created, the borders of Israel were not defined in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. Israel was a city for all the inhabitants. Israel was a state to be for all the inhabitants of Eretz Israel. It was not to be divided. And Jerusalem was to be intended to be the capital of the State of Israel. The UN partition plan of 1947 was never accepted. It never formed the basis for the creation of the State of Israel. So there is a perception out there that Jerusalem somehow should be an international city because of the partition plan. I think that's wrong, because the partition plan was never effective. It was rejected by the Arab world and never came into existence. And in principle, under international law, the boundaries of the mandate were to become the boundaries of the State of Israel. That's the way most state boundaries or borders are determined under international law. So for Israel, it should be no different, which means that the River Jordan, at least, would be the eastern border of the State of Israel upon its creation. And the only reason it wasn't was because Jordan illegitimately, illegally, aggressively attacked with the other Arab states on the 15th of May, 1948. And that's the reason the city was divided. That act was totally illegal, certainly as far as Jordan was concerned. It had no rights west of the Jordan River. So that during the period 49 to 1967, although the city was divided, Israel never accepted that division as defining the borders of the State of Israel. The armistice lines are not borders, and they were never intended to be borders. So I think the status of West Jerusalem is totally uncontroversial. There's no doubt whatsoever that West Jerusalem, so that's the rest of the Green Line, which is not a north-south line, but it's an enclave. Everything west of the Green Line indisputably is part of the sovereign territory of the State of Israel. So placing an embassy in West Jerusalem cannot in any way contravene international law. It can't be seen as supporting any illegal act on the part of Israel. That also says something about East Jerusalem, which is more complex, because in June 1967, Israel applied its law and sovereignty to East Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem, but did not officially claim sovereignty over the city. It has unified the city, and I think the Israeli Supreme Court says it's effectively applied sovereignty to the city as a whole. But if you go back to the history, it means that actually the whole city was intended to be the one undivided capital of the State of Israel, which, again, I emphasize is a state not only for the Jewish people, but for all the citizens of the State of Israel. So the argument that East Jerusalem is somehow illegally occupied or illegally controlled by Israel depend really on the two ideas. One is that Israel used force somehow illegitimately to conquer East Jerusalem. That I think is wrong because Israel was acting defensively against Jordan. That was definitely, at the time, indisputable. A lot of people are now arguing that Israel was acting aggressively in the Six-Day War. But certainly in 1967, that whole idea was defeated absolutely in the Security Council and the General Assembly. The majority of states honestly believed that Israel's actions, although preemptively attacking Egypt, was nevertheless defensive. And also that Israel, acting defensively, had the right to control and perhaps even claim sovereignty over that territory, which it took, Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem. The other argument is about occupation. There is a myth, I think it's a fallacy, that occupation somehow defeats sovereignty. In my view, even if you regard Judea and Samaria, even if you regard East Jerusalem as occupied, which I don't think they are, it doesn't say anything about sovereignty. It doesn't deny Israel's sovereign claims and rights. Okay, so Israel has never waived its claims of sovereignty to East Jerusalem. I think Judea and Samaria is different because of the Oslo Accords, but Jerusalem is taken out of the Oslo Accords. Israel has agreed to negotiate about Jerusalem, but it never has undermined or waived or passed over its sovereign claims to East Jerusalem. So there's much more that could be said. East Jerusalem is complicated. West Jerusalem, I think, is very clear. It's a sovereign act as between Israel and third states as to where the embassy is to be placed. And in my view, in our study, we believe that certainly placing the embassy in West Jerusalem raises I think, no problems under international law. The Czech Republic could not be accused of breaching international law in doing so. On the contrary, I think it would be affirming Israel's legitimate and proven sovereign rights. In conclusion, I would say that this whole thing is extremely politically controversial at the moment. As I said, there are 2 cases before the International Court of Justice concerning Jerusalem. One is the advisory opinion, the other is proceedings brought by the so-called State of Palestine against the United States for moving its embassy. That case is still pending. The court has not decided on this yet. So I think these 2 cases are highly biased and prejudiced. I think the court in the advisory opinion case is receiving only arguments and evidence from one side. I do hope the Czech Republic on the 19th of February will stand on behalf of Israel in the courts to stand for Israel's sovereignty over Jerusalem. It's terribly important. The Czech has made a very important submission to the court and has the opportunity to make oral submissions, which I think will be very important. Israel needs its friends in this court and in these international institutions. So whether the timing is right at the moment is another issue, but I think legally Israel is in a very strong position. The Czech Republic will be in a very strong position to move its embassy to West Jerusalem. It would be wise to couch that in the right language. I think President Trump did so quite well when he did so in 2017. But from a legal perspective, I believe that this would be a wise and an acceptable move to make. Thank you very much.
Děkujeme, Andrew, a než uvedu dalšího řečníka, což je pan magistr Házenko, tak bych trošku chtěl se vrátit do historie, proč jsme ho dneska pozvali, protože v roce 2019 mimo jiné byly, jako teď se dělají schůzky nejvyšších ústavních činitelů, tak tehdy se v tom roce také sešli nejvyšší ústavní činitele a ministerstvo zahraničních věcí bylo požádáno, ať se vyjádří oficiálně k přestěhování české ambasády do Izraele, respektive do Jeruzaléma. A ministerstvo zahraničních věcí vydalo určité stanovisko, nám bylo poskytnuto k dispozici a my jsme poprosili některé právníky a jeden z nich byl právě pan magistr Házenkov, aby se k těm zásadním otázkám vyjádřil. Pan magistr vypracoval 31stránkový rozbor, který na 3 jednoduché otázky po těch 31 stránkách důvodnění na poslední stránce jednoznačně odpověděl. Ale protože nechci stírat
Měl velkou
protokolu tehdejšího prezidenta republiky Miloslava Janulíka zákonodárců. Ledová sprcha přišla od ministerstva zahraničí, o tom už mluvil, to v podobě jejich stanoviska pro prezidentskou kancelář, že by to bylo pro spolu s mezinárodním právem ten přesun, konkrétně rezoluce měla být 448 a jako bonus ministerstva uvedlo, že stát Palestina, který přesunul ambasády do Izraela, zažadoval Spojené státy mezinárodní soudního práva. Do toho stanoviska se měl už znameného, nešlo se to asi na druhé straně. Cítil jsem si to stanovisko dotčen, ne jako jeho člen. Cítil jsem si dotčen jednak jako bývalý právní prezidentské kanceláře do profesora Klace, který by přijde mohl takové stanovisko samostatnosti, jak moc si úředníci ministerstva zahraničí dovolí jednat s prezidentem republiky. A ještě rovně jsem cítil dotčen jako pragrafní zaměstnanec oddělení mezinárodního práva veřejného, tedy toho oddělení ministerstva, je z největší pravděpodobností unosnosti. A panu Sedláčkovi, tak nebylo příliš velkou práci mě přesvědčit, jestli se náhodou nebo přiznal se, že do té doby mě izraelsko-arabský konflikt nějak zajímal, bral jsem na něj vyzýval netušil jsem na tím závěru dosti, netušil jsem, že analýza, kterou vám mám představit, bude mít nakonec přispět na specifické věci. Byly zadány následující 3 otázky. Za prvé, nakolik rezoluce ve bezpečnosti 473 závazného státu práva. Za druhé, je rezoluce Rady bezpečnosti 478 závazná pro státy na základě článku 25. Za třetí, jaký výsledek lze očekávat ze současného vývoje spolu mezi státem Palestina a Spojenými státy při mezinárodním soudním právu. Pro účely tohoto semináře jsem si výklad rozdělil na 3 části. Na část o mezinárodním právu a právnosti rezoluce 206. Na část speciální o rezoluci 476 a 478. A na část týkající se žaloby státu Palestina na Spojené státy pro přesun jejich ambasády v Jeruzalému. Čili nejdříve k mezinárodnímu právu je to takové. Mezinárodní právo je zvláštní druh práva, zcela jiný charakter a logiku než české právo či právo kteréhokoliv jiného státu. Mezinárodní právo je právo platné na stát. Svrchovaný je ten, komu nikdo nemůže být. Stavě se svrchované rozhodnutí není žádný který byl změněn když jsme to příklad, nazvěte české právo, ale věci skutečně vlastní výzveme, který je a dali si fyzický procesu českého státu. Dostali opravdu velmi přesně diskutující charakter mezinárodní práva. Mezinárodní právo je stojí na dobu napsaných finančních smlouvách a nejenom právě. Proto je základní zásady mezinárodního práva zásady zachované v finančních státech. Na jen mezinárodní právo stojí na práva, odmít mezinárodní právo stojí jako i jakýmkoliv zásady mezinárodní organizace mezi evropským právem a právem. Zásada zachované evropský stát prakticky znamená, že státy neznají všechny závazky, které to je mezinárodní dobrovolně je výjimostí překládat nebo se vymýšlet stát. Zásada zachované rovnosti je prakticky načel zásad Dobrovolné bezpečnosti ale představují dílčí a mezinárodní právo orientace, úlohu zásad. Proto je se posuzování jejich právní záležitosti třeba tyto zásady splnit konsenzu v případě jakékoliv rozhodné obchodního své začínané rezoluce a bezpečnosti právě zápasy nebo má charakter pouze obchodu. Je třeba dát všechno závěru, že právě závazná. Právě závazná může být ta rezoluce, u které o tom není žádný problém. Pravomoci Rady bezpečnosti jsou
sestupně popsány ve 2 kapitolách charty. Od těch nejjemnějších po ty nejtrestnější, včetně ozbrojeného zásahu mezinárodního společenství. V kapitole 6 jsou vyjmenovány pravomoci týkající se pokojného řešení sporu. V kapitole 7 jsou pak popsány možné akce, které Rada může podniknout v případě nějakého ozbrojeného konfliktu. Zde se nebudu pouštět do podrobného výkladu, postačí uvést 2 dílčí závěry. Za prvé, pouze rezoluce podle kapitoly 7 charty mohou být právně závazné. A to ještě zdaleka ne ve všech případech. Jen procento či snad dokonce promile rezolucí Rady je právně závazných. Ostatní mají charakter pouhých právně nezávazných doporučení. Za druhé, jak uvedl Mezinárodní soudní dvůr v roce 1971 ve svém poradním posudku ve věci Namibie, závaznost rezolucí Rady bezpečnosti je třeba posuzovat případ po případu, vzhledem ke všem okolnostem, včetně formulace textu a okolností vedoucích k jejich přijetí. Neexistuje žádné striktní pravidlo, kterým by se dala jejich závaznost jednoduše změřit. Teď v té druhé části, pokud se týče rezolucí 474-478. Nejdřív o čem jsou. Rezoluce 476 30. června 1980 odsoudila Izrael a mimo jiné prohlásila za právní nicotné všechny jeho kroky, které by vedly ke změně charakteru a právního statusu svatého města Jeruzaléma, včetně zákona o Jeruzalému. Rezoluce 478 mladší o 6 týdnů navázala na rezoluci 476, vyzvala všechny státy, aby stáhly své ambasády z Jeruzaléma, pokud je tam mají. V reakci na to Nizozemí, Bolívie, Chile, Kostarika, Kolumbie, Dominikánská republika, Ekvádor, Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, Panama, Venezuela a Uruguay své ambasády z Jeruzaléma skutečně stály. Podotýkám, že Spojené státy v té době nikdy ambasádu v Jeruzalémě neměly. Dospěl jsem k závěru, že obě tyto rezoluce mají charakter pouhého doporučení, respektive právního názoru Rady bezpečnosti a nejsou právně závazné vůbec, tedy nejsou právně závazné ani pro stát Izrael. Důvody, které mě k tomuto závěru přivedly, jsou 2. Za prvé, Rada bezpečnosti nemá pravomoc prohlašovat cokoliv za právně neplatné, to může učinit výhradně Mezinárodní soud. V podstatě Rada bezpečnosti si tady přisvojila pravomoc Mezinárodního soudu. Za druhé, tehdejší státní tajemník USA Maský, tedy americký ministr zahraničí, ministr zahraničí státu disponujícího právem veta, před hlasováním to ocituje, protože to je zcela zásadní. So there can be no mistake. Let me note that we will continue firm enforcement to resist any attempt to impose sanctions against Israel. That said,
unalterably opposed. We will vote against any such resolution. Further, the resolution requires both states that establish diplomatic missions in Europe to withdraw them from the policy. In our judgment, this provision is not valid. It is without force, and we reject it as disruptive and dictating other nations. It's obvious from the quote that the price for Resolution 476 just were born, and they were not legally binding, those two resolutions. They were never considered legally binding, otherwise, they wouldn't even start existing. So you can't enforce non-binding resolution, legally non-binding resolution, against the will of the state. Let me talk about the claim, which I believe is more significant for a possible move of Embassy 2 sometimes laymen and lawyers do mix it up. The International Court in The Hague is a very respected institution compared to the International Criminal Tribunal. The International Court is the United Nations body created in 1948, and it's just linked to the consequences of Second World War. And when comparing it to the International Criminal Court, is persecuting war criminals. That's the one that is persecuting for genocide and has issued international arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin. And of my introductory remarks concerning the court. In 1984, and then Bill Clinton was instructed so that until 31st of May, he moves the embassy to Jerusalem. But he got simultaneously the right to always postpone it for half a year, which might be inspiration even for Czech MPs. Bill Clinton, Obama, and Bush Jr. have been using this opportunity, and they have just prolonged the deadline. And first, President Trump just fulfilled it in May 2018. So there is basically the anniversary of the State of Israel. The American embassy is in Jerusalem. And the ambassador is commuting to Jerusalem. The building, by the way, is just in the Green Line, so at the Green Line from 1948, which obviously Palestine is like, and Palestine 2019 sued the USA and asked the International Court to declare the moving of the embassy to Israel and to instruct USA to again move the embassy from Jerusalem. Palestine is not United Nations member. The lawyers first had to find a way how to file the claim to the court. They tried, but it was just wishful thinking. They couldn't do it. I simply declare that, it's not really the court to deal with it there, mainly for two reasons. There's the principle of the sovereignty of states, so in front of the International Court can be only with approval of the following ways. Either agreement with the counterpart that the mutual dispute will be presented to the International Court, which Gapshikovo Nakmaroshke has got to, or obligatory jurisdiction, which means future disputes of those countries. So USA didn't accept that, those two reasons. And third possibility is to use legal dispute, and it was used by the State of Palestine. Vienna Conventions on Diplomatic Relationship have special protocol, and the parties have found themselves that they will present their future disputes to the International Court. So Palestine just signed the convention so that they could their supposed right present. And the USA reacted and explicitly explained the reason to the Secretary of United Nations, so that they don't wish any dispute with the State of Palestine to be presented in front of the International Court. The first reason why Palestine doesn't have the right to even file the claim is that the sued party doesn't agree. So, should the court really present the claim, it would breach the sovereignty and equality of the countries. It might sound strangely, but in the international, it's normal that one state can't sue another state against his will. Second reason why the jurisdiction doesn't apply. Even if the United States would wish to withdraw from that clause, Palestine is not a member of the United Nations, so they can't even be in front of the court. But the International Court in 2004 issued a judgment to Yugoslavia against other countries. It applies that it's just before the International Court has been created. So there was interim resolution in between the wars where the predecessor of the International Court could have decided. And obviously, again, Switzerland decided to join 2002. So, should the International Court doesn't wish to really destroy all of its judgments from the past, they should reflect to the Vienna Convention. So 16 years after the International Court has been created, it doesn't refer to, so Palestine can't present its case. This was to the jurisdiction. Moreover, I claim that should the International Court really analyze the claim, USA didn't breach the Vienna Convention for the two reasons. Firstly, there is no standard of international law that would instruct states where the embassy should be located. For example, Madagascar, an ambassador should be located in a certain place, or, ambassador in Norway somewhere else. It's an agreement of those two countries. So Israel could say where the U.S. ambassador should be located, but Palestine, it's none of Palestine's business in the way. They can't try to influence future location of USA ambassador. It could apply only in case if Palestine was one day recognized by the US. So Israel is a sovereign country, so Palestine can't contradict. So it's like a frivolous type of claim, in the sense it's more playing upon the effect, not upon its outcome and judgment. I was naive because I thought that the claim would be denied. After the 15th of November, both parties were supposed to come, and it's still in The Hague from autumn 2019, fourth year. No change whatsoever. Something else has happened, and I have to mention anyway. I don't know whether it's generally known amongst the friends of Israel, but towards the end of 2022, the United Nations in its resolution requested the so-called advisory judgment and analysis of the International Court. So the court is getting space not to deal with formalities of the Palestine claim. Now, 25th of October was lapsing the deadline by which the countries could present their legal views. I would be interested, by the way, whether the Czech Republic has used this opportunity. I believe that the International Court will be now focusing upon issuing the judgment from United Nations and will just let the Palestine claim, because, they will be just represent the arguments, and that claim from Palestine could be denied. Let me add that the advisory judgments are not binding even for the institution that have requested them, but they have a very important role. We hope that the reputation of International Court will continue, and thank you
Once again, thank you. I'm very grateful, and I'm very grateful that your work from 2019 has actually found its application also today. So, according to the program, I'd like to continue with my, I believe, very brief contribution, because we have one more legal opinion to listen to, and we will certainly be looking forward to the presentation of Pavel Žáček, Member of Parliament, from his recent trip to the State of Israel. Why did I decide to address this respectable gathering? Well, it has a simple reason. Very often, the international law is being mentioned as something that is crystal clear, which is actually respected, and the greatest minds are actually thinking in its academic terms, and while in mutual respect they actually adopt acceptable resolutions. But this is not the case. What I wanted to say is that the resolutions that have been mentioned, the resolution 476 and 478, have been adopted under enormous pressure. And to be precise, they have been adopted under, blackmailing power. What am I talking about? Well, you all know that 50 years ago, the Yom Kippur War ended. I don't have to explain why it is called this way, because I'm with the people who are perfectly aware of what it is. But in any case, Israel was attacked, and Israel won, because it defended itself. The war took place from the 6th of October to the 25th of October, so this is roughly 20 days. Israel was attacked by countries, Egypt and Syria in particular. And the weapon, which was crude oil, was actually used by the countries that did not attack Israel. And Egypt and Syria are not members of the countries exporting crude oil, the OPEC countries. For your information, we all know, and we actually follow international press, and we know that a barrel of Middle East crude oil is now at about $80 to $100 per barrel. It fluctuates, obviously, but at that time, I'm referring to in 1973, at the beginning of 1973, crude oil was about $3 a barrel, if you compare it to today's prices. In 1973, after the war, the Yom Kippur War started, the OPEC countries decided to use this crude oil weapon. This weapon was very powerful, and it was also very efficient indeed, unfortunately. This weapon didn't have was not two-sided, but it was actually even more efficient, because the price of crude oil rose up by 5% every month, and it was requested that the countries against which these decisions were actually taken, so by every month they decreased the production by 5%, so it was half of the production, and those countries who were so dull and did not want to understand, they actually applied embargo, so they did not export crude oil to some other countries. So this is how countries supporting Israel were actually affected. countries that supported Israel at that time were buying half of the crude oil production. And this half of the production was the subject of what I was referring to. So a sharp increase in price. So to start with, it was actually quadruple, so 400%. Furthermore, the OPEC countries decreased the production by 5%, and at the end, it was the embargoes of the shut off supply. And who were the countries affected? The embargo was declared for countries supporting Israel. The USA, Canada, Great Britain, the Netherlands, later on Japan was also embargoed. There were also some African countries that were affected. For example, Rhodesia, South Africa, the Netherlands, I think I mentioned that. Portugal is quite interesting because Portugal provided the USA when they were transporting, when the USA were actually providing weapons to Israel. Portugal provided the US Air Forces with the airport at one of its islands. So you can probably imagine what the embargo meant, and the outcome was terrible. People were not driving their cars. Some of the countries, people were able to drive during the weekends. There was an effect on the production of electricity, chemicals products, pesticides, and medicine. Because crude oil is used everything all of a sudden. Happened with the active embargo. And he was up to those countries had to face them because the countries those countries will be against Israel. Otherwise they will experience very bad unequal because the inflation rate in the Ukraine was 20%. And take a look, and we are talking about 7% inflation rate in England. In the United Kingdom, we had 20% inflation rate at that time. There were many other measures. Maybe get the picture on the screen here, but I think that you will probably remember this picture when the German Volkswagen was actually pulled by two horses. This was a symbol of how where the Western economy was headed. But why do I mention that? How did the political representation react to this situation? Well, already on the 5th of November 1973, after 20 days since the embargo was declared, the ministers of foreign affairs of the European community they actually requested Israeli Ministry of Defense to actually withdraw from the new territories. So it only took 20 days. It only took 20 days of this hard blackmail. So this was the first crude oil crisis in 1973. Only 7 years later, the second crude oil crisis occurred. It was a slightly different story. There was a coup in Iran and a huge war between Iran and Iraq. But this event has actually caused the crude oil prices to skyrocket. And when I told you it was $3 a barrel at that time, in 1980 it was $39.50 per barrel, 10 times more. So this happened in 1980. So what do you think? 7 years is not a long time to erase that from the historical memory. You know, when Israel wanted to have Israel as its indivisible capital, told the countries and embassies to move from Jerusalem. What would follow? They would not have obeyed. They still very well remembered what got them on their knees 7 years ago, and they didn't want to get back on their knees again. So they actually agreed. In Czech we have a very nice word for it, but I just don't want to use it here today. So, to go back to the Security Council of the United Nations, let me share two very interesting examples with you about how respectable body this is. In 1975, the United Nations has adopted the infamous resolution, which basically meant that Zionism equals racism. Only to back to 1991, when there was a new world order and the Soviet Union was fallen apart. This one single resolution was revoked and cancelled, and I think that this is the way it should be, and I think the same assembly should actually approach Jerusalem in the same way. It should not be so ridiculous. And the resolution of the Security Council, one of them is 250 1968, in which the Security Council of the United Nations unanimously tells Israel, don't you dare organize the march through Jerusalem. Anyway. Well, of course, 5 days later, Israel, of course, organized that. There was resolution 251 of the Security Council of the United Nations, which said that we are utterly concerned about the fact that you have organized the march to Jerusalem. So, this can give you a better idea about the resolutions of the Security Council of the United Nations. And now, without any further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Michal Pasovsky, who started his work in 2019, and I'm happy that it is the time now to actually present it. The floor is yours. So, thank you for giving me the floor. Mr. Chair, Excellency, Madam Ambassador, I'd like to follow what my colleague Mr. Hasenkopf has said when he was talking about the International Criminal Court, the International Tribunal in The Hague, because not always the law requires a judge. And by way of introduction, let me quote from the letter written by Prince Amir Faisal on the 1st of March 1919 to the future President of the State of Israel, Chaim Weizmann. So the future king wrote, "Us, we the Arabs, especially those more educated among us, see the greatest sympathy for the Zionist movement. Together we are working on the reformed and reunified Middle East, and our movements are complementary." The letter continues, of course, and the reason why I cite that is that there are also other options than going to the court. I am a lawyer, and I do not wish to interfere into the political issues, but being a lawyer, I am aware that a bad agreement is still much better than a good court case, and That's why I quote this letter. I think there are other options opposed to actually bringing each other to the court and doing those gestures in front of the public, both domestically or internationally. So, again, I will be talking as a lawyer here today. I will refrain from influencing the politics, and I'd like to actually draw your attention to the former ancient philosophers, because every matter is true from as many angles as you can actually take a look at it. And this is the same for lawyers. Every lawyer has his own opinion. So the law is a maze to which there are more exits. And it depends from which end you take a look at this maze. So this is actually something I wanted to say before I will start to elaborate on the issues. My colleague Hasenkopf has already has used the analogy of the international law. And he said that the international law is based on bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements in some of the areas such as the civic law or family law or trade law or commercial law. The rules are clear and they are adhered to. For example, in the international transport, you have clear rules which are observed, and there are courts who decide about that. When it comes to public law, then you have the countries who are sovereigns in this respect, and we have to agree with what Mr. Hasenkopf has said. It is like chess figures on a chessboard, where every single chess figure plays according to its own rules. So, there are no rules, and if a country wants, they just go straight, or they agree with someone else that they will actually make a move at the same time, etc. So, this is exactly what I'm trying to say. The law is actually in favor of those who are wise and who can see a long way ahead, and that's why I quoted the letter at the beginning, and I will refer to it a number of times. And it's true that the prince and later on the King Faisal, in his practical political life, he behaved differently to what he has written in the letter. They became friends with King Faisal after the First World War. And then, of course, the development in the region took a different sort of swing, and the political situation requested some steps to be taken. However, the situation could have been addressed differently, and that's why I'm trying to bring your attention to this. When we are talking about the resolutions of the Security Council and the city of Jerusalem, it has been mentioned. We have to start with the resolution of 1947, which is a resolution 181, which first mentions the division of the area. It first mentions Jerusalem. It mentions the character. It talks about what the Jerusalem should be. But let's be blunt. Well, the resolution in chapter 1 says that as far as religious points and structures are concerned, the current rights pertaining to these religious and holy places will not be denied and affected, etc. And this resolution grants free access to those religions. This resolution was actually not reflected by the war of independence that actually erupted, let's say, half a year after this resolution was adopted. And following the war, the state of Israel defended its existence, its sheer existence. As far as the war is concerned, and it is not mentioned very often, because it is said that Israel never lost the war. But when it comes to 1948, I am not so sure whether or not Israel has won the war. It defended its independence, but the only side who won the war quite clearly was Jordan. And we have to remind ourselves of that. Jordan has conquered a large part of the territory that was originally meant to be part of the Jewish state, and Jordan also conquered half of Jerusalem. Since then, the Jewish population was not allowed to enter the old city, let alone the holy places. The Jewish part of the old city was actually despopulated from the Jewish population. The Jews were basically moved out of the old city. Out of 22 synagogues, 21 were destroyed, including the biggest one. They were destroyed, burnt down, and wherever there was Jewish settlements in the old part of the city, the UN established refugee camps, and the inhabitants from the Jordanian territory who fled the country from the places which were conquered by Israel were relocated there. So this was the situation in 1948, and which stayed in existence until the Six-Day War in 1967. And I think that this is also the reason, or it has been formally claimed as the reason, why 13 years later, in 1980, the Security Council has adopted the two resolutions that have been mentioned so many times and that are being referred to continuously, both by the general public, European bodies and our bodies, because the United Nations Security Council were afraid that Israel will adopt the same policy as Jordan, that they will not let the Muslims into the old part of the city, just like the Jordanians were not actually allowing the Jewish population into the old town. So the freedom would not be granted. So in this respect, I'd like to remind you of one more notion which came to existence after 1967. The situation changed dramatically. You know that following the Six-Day War, the old city of Jerusalem was liberated, and ever since then, all the religions have access to the holy places. The Jews have moved back into the parts of the old town where they have lived for thousands of years. The Armenian part was preserved, the Christian, the Arab part were preserved. But then in 1967, the division of the country, of the city by the Green Line proved not to be sustainable. At that time, Tzedek Koleh, a very famous mayor of Jerusalem, he was the one who came with the idea of Jerusalem being an indivisible city. And in 1967, it only had practical reasons why I mentioned that. Because Jerusalem was built as one city. It has one sewer system. It has one water mains. It has one electricity distribution system. And it is actually not possible to make the sewers stop flowing at the Green Line. It is not possible to make the water go uphill. Well, theoretically you can do that, but it costs a lot of money, of course. So the city has to function as an organism, be it from the services, waste removal, etc., etc. There are many reasons, but it's also for urban reasons. I don't know if you had followed the development of Jerusalem over the past 30 years. You can see that Jerusalem is one living organism. It lives. Motorways are being built, bypasses are being built. And if it was not the case, this would not have been possible. And all the theories about that it will divide somehow and it will coexist somehow. Well, of course, if I were sitting in New York in a high-rise building and I would be talking about the city I never visited, well, theoretically you can come up with anything, but it is impossible to live in such a city, especially when it's so many, just like Jerusalem. So this is as far as the idea of one Jerusalem, one city. And this is actually also my comment to the two resolutions, because my colleague has elaborated on that quite extensively. But there's one thing I'd like to draw attention to. The Security Council says that the Holy City, etc. And I would like to say that not even the Security Council said or declared what the Holy City really is. What do they mean by that? It is not described in the resolutions. And has it ever occurred to the Security Council that the new settlements which were built in the west of Jerusalem or east of Jerusalem would be the part of the Holy City? Or did the Security Council refer to the old quarters, to the old part of the city, including the holy places? Or did the Security Council mean also some of the holy places which are further away from the old town, such as the Olivet Mountain? Well, we don't know. They haven't provided that with an answer.
I'd like to point out with a couple of words what was going on after 1980 and accepting those two resolutions. The letter of the prince to the president was forgotten. There was a development of Jordan and Israel's relationship. In the late 80s got into normal. There was still the problem that Jordan couldn't have signed any treaty with Israel. It was under their dignity to give away their territory. The peace agreement, they would have to just say that the territory that was occupied in the Six-Day War, and on the other hand, they wanted certain format that would guarantee stability and security as far as Israel is concerned. That's why Jordan didn't sign any treaty with Israel before the relationship are balanced out with the autonomy of Palestine. That happened in those Oslo treaties. You know that there were two, first treaty in 93, then amendments to those treaties, Oslo treaties, and first in 94 there was peace agreement between Israel and Jordan. But the parties were saying that it was very easy peasy. They were arguing more about technical nitty-gritties and not political issues. So the problem seemed to be solved. And as far as Jerusalem is concerned, it meant that holy places were under administration of the Jordan Muslim Foundation that administers the top of the mountain. Neither Palestinian administration nor Israel only for some security features. On the other hand, we're definitely getting rid of the fears that in theory were published in those two resolutions, 476 and 478. Those two Oslo treaties had agreement between Israel and Jordan that when talking about bilateral law closed this issue. I would like to point out that in those two acts of treaties, Oslo Treaty and Jordan, and in the third source, agreements of Camp David agreements, I believe 2000, year 2000, Palestinians just stepped back, but it has been agreed upon and signed. Everywhere one talks about relationships of Palestine, autonomy and Israel will be governed exclusively by 246 and 338 resolutions of United Nations. 246 and 338. No resolution 476 or 478 is mentioned there. My question is, do we have the right, I mean worldwide representation, to try to say to those two parties what they are supposed to agree upon between themselves? Famous 3 times. First Oslo Treaties, second Oslo Treaties, Camp David Treaties clearly have signed that between themselves they will have relationships based upon Security Council Resolution 242 and 338. Full stop. The rest of the world doesn't have the right to dictate to them how they should agree. There is no source of international law that would exist and shouldn't exist. It would be totally non-practical because it wouldn't function. I would like to point out, Mr. Hasenkopf already mentioned another source of international law, Viennese Convention of Contractual Law. It's not about diplomatic relationships. This governs the format and content of international laws and fits under the category of public law. And it's based upon the principle so contracts are to be respected and stick to. Let me come back again to what two parties have agreed should be stick to and respected. We shouldn't dictate anything else to them what they're supposed to do. The puzzle I tried to put into the pieces of the puzzle to put together again with the embassy. It doesn't contradict those conventions. Oslo Treaties, first round, second round, neither Camp David, that Palestinians withdrew from, but they were signed, and doesn't contradict 242 and 338 Security Council resolution. Both parties say that they base upon it their own mutual relationships. As far as the fears of protection of holy places in Jerusalem, it has been solved by the treaties and by the agreement between Israel and Jordan. The peace agreement solves it. To summarize it into one sentence, it's not a legal issue, but it's an issue of political nature only. Thank you for your dedicated attention.
Vážení, blížíme se.
Dear all, we are coming towards the end and climax of our conference. I would like to ask Mr. Žáček to comment on the topic we have been discussing, but to also present to us what's going on in Israel, because he came recently from Israel back. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, Your Excellency, let me link the political, what I am presenting, support of Israel, to link it to our Prague Declaration that is linked to the declaration of the Parliament from the 7th of October, and let me link it that goes beyond my political experience. I passed as a journalist. I've been invited second time to Mission of Solidarity. 16 European delegates. They were also UK delegates, not only EU countries. So we we are in Tel Aviv 1 month after 7th of October. We were in Gaza, Faru Asa, in Tel Aviv, next to the kibbutz that was affected mostly. Over 120 fatal. And we have met Knesset representatives. We could have talked to policemen. They were fighting the formed RCs for IDF representatives. And what was the most emotional for me, to talk with the families of the victims. So my political and journalist profile, all acts I go through in political life, try to record. So this will be just my moments in Israel when you were supposed to be there. 2 days with my colleague Janishek, because one flight was moved. We couldn't have flown back to Prague, so we extended our stay and we could participate in security briefings. They were interesting. Why it happened, how it happened, and that were extremely open and were based upon the dramatic situation. The Israeli forces, Israeli civilians, Israeli state has to go through. This is the airport, Ben Gurion, where for the arrivals were pictures with names and details of all the victims, not only of the Supernova Festival, but from all other locations in Israel. So this is the Hamas war crime they committed. They just took away as a individuals 9 months old to 85 plus. So they were even Holocaust survivors, people from the most peaceful kibbutzes from Gaza Strip who have been assisting Palestinians. They've been helping them, employing them when needed. They were transporting them to Israeli hospitals. And some of them that were coming to be employed in kibbutz was just giving intelligence information. So what was going on there was a terrorist act, very personal one. The terrorists, the first wave was contacting the civilians with first names. They were trying to lure them out and killing either parents or children in front of their eyes. You can see another victims of Hamas. We are confronted. That's the start of everything happening after 7th of October. Obviously, one has to remind European audience of those acts. What we saw after our arrival in the morning, probably even stronger comparing it with the family members of the hostages. This was the base where people from southern Israel were coming, of the people who were executed or killed. colonel of Israeli army was explaining to us the space where the bodies are warehoused, how forensic experts work with them from the Israeli army, based upon their experience from the past, from a lot of fights, were confronted with very brutal violence and consequences of the brutal violence they haven't come across in the past. And they were saying, the right-hand side are bodies wrapped, whole bodies, or smaller wraps with just children's bodies without any hands. Decapitated. It was very strong. We had MP from Lithuania with us, from Holocaust survival family, and he was crying there. I believe this message is strong as well. What the experts had to go through, the army. After a couple of days of stay, the army is bringing the visitors, all delegations, NATO forces and EU representatives. And it's very sad that in the 21st century it's needed to show something like that. For me, it's something that it's linked to the Holocaust, and we are confronted, also part of our history. They are political, foreign, formed terrorist forces who wish to continue, something like that. It's a fight of civilizations. So we are strongly engaged to defend civilization. And it's something that's linking us strongly. Why Israeli forces, Israeli government enables and opens such location? Obviously, for the victims, touches members of the survivors, Israel and worldwide, also to foreigners, because we know that at the festival there were a lot of other nationalities, or Thailand. It refers to Thai foreign workers that were employed in Israel. Logically, it's linked to Israeli Arabs. All those communities had their friends there. So it's part of our mission. It's something we are linked with, and we are forced to support Israel. Obviously, it will continue on 28th of November. There will be 47-long documentary what Hamas and the terrorists online, based upon ISIS matrix via social network, they were publishing the atrocities, the shock that terrorist movement is preparing not only to Israel but worldwide, and to the families living in the kibbutzes and nearby Gaza. Israelis nevertheless are used to fight and to react. It's not something new to them, but or surprising, they are able to react. But here we have to react differently and go further and show the victims as a reaction to what the information brutal attack has caused when they were able to act brutally, and they were as if competing with the defeated ISIS terrorists who could conduct more brutality and atrocities. But they were underlying to us. You know, with ISIS the fight was depersonalized, I can mention. You might recall the execution of the pilot from Jordan. The murderers were able to lure the families out of their houses, and they were using the information that they got from their intelligence sources, from the employees that were coming every day crossing from Gaza. It's something you can't fetch together. It will play a role in the willingness of Israel to let people to Israel. I hope that Gaza will change and Israeli armed forces will do most. We have to react to what's going on worldwide. Some political forces are not able to live next to a terrorist organization that will decide to murder 1,200. Well, we don't know how many actually up to nowadays. They've been doing with them, burning them on spot. The whole families were put on fire when they were sticking together. It's not possible. It's very difficult to analyze, whose bodies those are. I believe it's important to use in the reaction to shock the world, but not the way the terrorists did, but to show how they murdered, raped, what they were doing. For me, it's something that I also commented it in the Czech media. It's so strong to me that I have been comparing it to the forces coming to the concentration camps, the prisoners and survivors in the concentration camps. So it's not surprising for me that someone is able to try to label someone as a natives, but they are doing similar or equal type of atrocities. I believe this is something everyone should have it in their memory. We are defending Europe. We know which kind of fifth units we have here who are able to glorify such evil and violence. So we have to stand up against and make sure there is defense and security of not only Israel.
My jsme pokračovali, bude tam vidět.
We continued, went through Sderot, which was probably the largest city to be hit by the attack. We learned during the security and army briefings the number of terrorists was enormous. They wanted to get not only to Beersheba but also to the Wax Bank, and but thanks to the resistance of some of the kibbutzes and the police stations. This is the police station in Sderot where all the policemen fell dead, and thanks to the fact that the IDF forces have been gradually deployed in reaction and in response to the situation. And we had the opportunity to talk to one of the leaders of the special unit, and he told us they didn't know what they were facing because the communication was not functional. They didn't know how many terrorists they will be actually fighting, and that's also why there were massive casualties among so this is 2 kilometers from our border. And the kibbutz that had about 40 casualties and a number of kidnapped. So, well, formally speaking, it wasn't as bad as the kibbutz next to it, Be'eri, with 120 dead and tens of kidnapped, as well as a high number of rescued people. Well, what you can see there, or what I saw, was shocking, and of course it was one of the goals of the terrorists, because this was an encounter with a different civilization, and some of the moments and some of the images that were actually shown on the networks can be compared to the Russian barbarians who were conquering the villages, and then they were wondering, surprised by what they found in the fridges. But this was like an encounter of a medieval time, civilization from medieval time with the civilization, and this is actually something we need to remember. We know, we tend to have experts and politicians and Semites who say, or who claim there was no Holocaust. So our mission was a mission that in the future will remind the European memory and European cultures of what has happened there, and it will actually face the lies which claim that the Israelis did it themselves and that the videos are fake, and well, the counter-propaganda that is available and that is spreading around the world, and which is actually disseminated by the terrorists and the others behind them, that's something we have to actually oppose, and that was the reason why I went there. This is a poster, as you can see, equivalent of the mayor, leader of the kibbutz, who fell dead at the place he was trying to prove what he was representing. Population, very popular politician, very symbolic picture. Again, moments that get you. The commander got me to the kibbutz in the morning, and that was one of my questions, which I asked. And I asked the IDF representatives and the security experts, what is that opinion about me? How the attack was carried out, because of course that Hamas is practicing how to overcome the barriers at the borders. They've been aware of that. They've done it like 50 times, 100 times before, and then out of the sudden, they got a command to go live and to do it again. And the scale of the attack and the number of terrorists in the 3 waves that there were, because there was this first sort of attack wave, and I will mention that later on in connection with the leader of the special unit of the IDF. So in the first wave there was something between 2,000 to 3,000 attackers, which was out of the ordinary, and they knew where they were going. They knew who has weapons, who has some ammunition, etc. So they basically tried to eliminate those people who had access to weapons and that would have been able to defend themselves. And they also made use of the knowledge of how the Israelis react to the rocket or missile attacks. So after 5 minutes, they stay in the shelters for 5 minutes, and that's exactly the time the terrorists needed to get over the protection lines or the defensive lines of the kibbutzes. And you will be able to see one of those points later on. So from a tactical point of view, this was very well prepared, unfortunately, and it actually, the moment of surprise was actually playing a significant role. But there were also kibbutzes that defended themselves. So had our own cameraman. You can also see that we were protected. We were provided with helmets and bulletproof vests. We were actually briefed what to do in case we were ambushed or attacked. And in this picture you can see the Czech trace, the Czech car. Again, you can see here emotions in one picture. This was almost in every, it was almost in front of every house. Because, you know, terrorist attack at the moment when the families were getting ready for their breakfast of prayers. And this was the case which was described by the Israeli soldiers who accompanied us. They told us that the father of the family went to get his weapon, and by the time he got back, part of the family was already killed, or the babies were kidnapped. And of course, he would have been gone for the weapon. He might have been kidnapped as well or killed, but there must have been very dramatic moments, and we could see as the proof of the violence the terrorists were instructed. So you can see both the shells and the shells, and basically the crowd. We don't know where the baby is. It's in Gaza, wherever it is, and we don't know if they're ever coming back. We can lose it. Yeah. This is a presentation of the police unit force. We already had an opportunity to talk to him during our first trip to Israel with him, and he presented us to the sophisticated security system in the whole city, and he accompanied us to Sderot, to Asa. He's got great experience from the anti-terrorist unit, and he described to us what was happening in those houses. Here, well, today these kibbutz places enormous trauma. So it is actually, all these kibbutzes are controlled by the IDF units. Despite of the drama, these pictures, we also felt enormous hope. Because two elderly people have returned back home and told us, the other visitors, that we will all come back, the survivors. We shall refurbish everything, renew our community. It will look like new. They have not broken us. And I think that this will also be an answer to the terrorists, because these kibbutzes will be flourishing again one day. But they will nevertheless bear their fate, and we will continue to. This is a very symbolic picture as well. A house that's been raided, basically. Probably getting ready for breakfast and flying This is a place from where, you know, the terrorists came, you know, so they basically destroyed everything. That's again the house. Here you can see the gate they ran through. In the back you can see Gaza. On the skyline, that's Gaza. When we were visiting this place, we could see, you know, strikes by the Israeli Air Force. From time to time, we were even able to see the explosions in Gaza. So the first part of the operation was having seen that, having experienced, we've seen going through it emotionally. Then we took a trip back to Jerusalem. This is the Speaker of the Knesset. We have had the opportunity to meet him at the beginning of this year under different circumstances and conditions. We were discussing support, cooperation on cultural and parliamentary dimension of our diplomacy. And then we were there in order to show our support and help. Basically sharing stories. Our colleague Zinger's, the Holocaust, his family, when he was given the role, this was an integral part of the story. And I took the liberty to say a few words. Everything's clear. We've seen it right from the beginning. We saw it on the social networks. At that time I was at the NATO summit in Copenhagen. The attack occurred. So I told them that I'm coming to you to tell you that we are supporting you, in what you need to do, and we believe that the Israeli government will do everything that is required. And at the same time I was able to convey the words of our Prime Minister, who said after his return from Israel that we will continue to be the voice of Israel in the European Union. So I think that this was something that was very necessary. So I didn't only respond to what we have seen on the place, because there were some people from Germany, we had our colleague from Iceland, we had two representatives from Great Britain, Slovenia, there were some people from the Bulgarian Parliament. The Bulgarian section is very strong. So we had basically conveyed the resolution that we have adopted in the Parliament. So I took the liberty to emphasise that. You can see that it was very different to any other parliamentary meeting where we talk about future, which is peaceful. This time it was rather a reflection, also from the Israeli side, what has happened and what sort of impact will it have on the Israeli political life, and what sort of impact will it have on the European society. Yeah. Personal emotions, well captured. This is the number Parliament asking, whom I met at the Jerusalem Day, and I think it speaks for itself. So here, this is a different place in Tel Aviv, the Ministry of Defense, super modern building, General Staff location. We had a meeting with the press spokesman of the IDF, non-standard, because it was very raw, very open. We asked open questions. We asked not only about what has been and what has taken place, but what will also be, and what sort of we can communicate in terms of what the IDF is doing in order to actually eliminate Hamas and to retrieve the ones who were kidnapped. So this is a picture in option.
Then we moved to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, bring them home. A slogan that was visible everywhere. You will see there are photos in a while, so that's a slogan that is just going across Israel. Here you can see me. For us, it was very strong. He didn't have to talk compared to colleagues who have presented how their states and countries are reacting. Daniel knows very well what Czech Republic does and how we support our friends. All of us in front of the building of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you see the victims. Then we continued to let me trace back. In Sderot, in the kibbutz, you might recall the police station where all policemen were killed and ambushed. There were 20 or more, and ambushed by hundreds of terrorists. They just tried to go through to next locations. So the firearms of the policemen, they didn't have any other arms. It will be probably part of the analysis as well for the future. And the Israeli armed forces tried to get to the building back. Nothing left out of the building, basically. We had to be cautious. You could hear rockets from Gaza. One of the houses in Sderot, what it looks like after you had the missile, how it went through the house. Here we are with information well received. You can see accompanying ex-colonel and the National Police Force briefing Sderot about the operation. We're asking openly what has been analyzed already. The first wave where members of the terrorist group that were just suicidal attackers, and the preparations lasted 2 years, and people who didn't have a cell phone in their hands without any digital trace so that they would be identifiable. And there were individuals that you could trace back by standard intelligence because they had no cell phones. The second wave was about killing and kidnapping, and third wave how to separate the guilt of Gaza population and the terrorists. Third wave were Palestinians and Arabs living in Gaza. We were not told who initiated it, they were just let in so that they were accompanying terrorists to their mission, whether they were alone or on their own. But this third wave, the Gaza civilians were raping, kidnapping, stealing, killing. We saw shots of pensioners who just went to Israel and associated to me the Russian soldiers sending home fridges. Civilization fight. I see someone being well off, but trying to rape him or her. We got information. First, Israeli aircraft got to the Gaza line 6 in the morning, 8 in the morning. But my assessment, 9/11 syndrome from my side, they were not allowed to attack civilians. So civilians were there, so they didn't attack them. And the aircraft attacked first during the third wave of the terrorist attack. were informed till our visit, 1 month, victims, which countries, or the kidnapped into Gaza, and it wasn't easy to link the bodies with the names. He talked with the representative of special forces within Israeli army, and it was very complicated to try to match the names to the victims. Everywhere saw where the headquarters, so there used to be 35,000, now it was just a couple of thousands instead of. They were moved or relocated to the middle of Israel. Everywhere, logically, we saw photos as the attitude of Israeli public and data of the kidnapped. It was us. Here again, strong emotions again. You didn't know what to say. Family members of the kidnapped, wives, children, grandmas, grandpas, or other family members. We were asked for international support. We were, it lasted 1 month, although nowadays or today we hope that 50 kidnapped will be returned back. We will see what their status of health will be. What they were living during that month was very brutal. I allow myself to state it's worse than knowing them being killed, not being able to going through any suffering or violence. Small children, 3-year-old who saw parents being kidnapped and killed, and then the child being kidnapped. So you were thinking on spot what you can do. We were assured by the Israeli government representatives that are authorized to do maximum, At that time there was information that Hamas is tricky. It's good to underline that unofficial channels of Arab countries say, destroy Hamas, they are our allies, our enemies as well. That's how complicated the situation is. On the other hand, you have someone who perceives differently human being, and you have to balance it out for a civilized country to do something about it. Whether it's army law, international law, where does it fit? What's going on in Gaza? Again. They had to present their life stories and go into the fight to assist and try to create some pressure to the armed forces and government, to the counterparty that is not respecting any law, that just wishes to liquidate the Israeli state and the population, Israeli population. So it's very complicated situation, and the tactics of the enemy is not new, but never it was implemented in such a scope again. You try to give them strengths while embracing them. Those two were conquered faster. To conclude, the message doesn't need any words. A sad story, and has a happy ending in a way. Here we see 31-year-old commander of special Israeli forces on the 6th, and he was celebrating his birthday. And in the morning, he got to put on the uniform and get into the attack. They didn't know what they will be facing, against whom. The information was scarce from Gaza. Some units were already destroyed. On the border forces, we saw some shots. We saw it in the social media, so they were sent to Gaza, and he was telling us they got into the kibbutz. They catched a terrorist that had 2 Israeli females in the pickup. He was scared, they tried to interview him, handed him over, and they got killed. They were in the first kibbutz. Their task and information was there are 50 hostages in the canteen. So he had some special machine gun, so he went to see his supervisor. And his unit was marching both sides. He didn't know what they saw in the houses. He just perceived and tried to suppress that he was marching along the road from one. He saw the dead bodies, but he didn't see the atrocities in the houses. He got into the canteen. I don't know what the time was. They were shot from left-hand side, and they had so he thought they shooted him off. His colleague was shot 5 times. They hid it below the canteen before the unit got there. It lasted 1 hour and 1 hour and a half. He bleeded. He managed, but his body died. The whole unit, he got to the hospital and to Tel Aviv, and he was supposed to get into the surgery so that the hand would be able to be movable again. 3 days he was unconscious. After his buddies came to see him, what they saw in the houses, he couldn't step into anywhere without human body. They thought, we came late, we didn't fulfill our mission. On the other hand, they freed the 50 hostages, so no one would kidnap them. So the number of 242 is not bigger. So some of the bodies are not yet identified and matched. I have been asking him how he perceived the terrorists, how they fight it, whether they were on drugs. What can he say about them when they saw them face to face? They were not trained as the Israelis were. They were just devoted. They had ammunition for a week, being ready for a long fight. Some of them were already in Israeli uniforms. They just took it on. They're getting them to Gaza. And they were ready to die. They had on their bodies being ready for terrorist heaven. So they didn't want to just get to the furthest line. They just a lot of them, probably 1,000 of them, were taken by the army, and some of the commanders were detained. So some of them look like it, what I understood. Not only Czech Republic, but I believe that some process should be against them. You know, it's not possible to have certain justice reinstalled. It's impossible. You know, for the atrocities they were doing. 21st century and state of law, you know, it's just we aren't ready for it. So I speak as a human being that has been under the impressions, but you know, to kill them is not enough. You know, what they have been doing to children, to the families, you know, I speak here as not a politician of the 21st century. You know, it is a slaughter, anti-human act, and in this sense, how to live further or with it, to let Gaza to its destiny, and those anti-human creatures that don't value human life. I need to know, we need to talk about it. No civilized country can accept it. The country has to react. No reaction. It means that it will deny why it has been created, and also say, you know, do it again, come again. It's something that's unacceptable. It's not just an issue of Israel. It's, you know, the people who were killed, they are not just Israelis, they are from worldwide origin, many countries, nationalities. So when you see what's going on, I'm talking about people who are talking positively about terrorist movement that is symbolized by this terrorist brutal denial of everything human.
In this sense, it was actually my privilege to represent Czechia in Israel, and I hope that this will continue to be the case, and hopefully other members of parliament will follow up, because ELNET is organizing other missions, and I think it's necessary. Of course, on the 28th of November, we will have the screening of these atrocities. Hopefully, well, certainly will not be for everyone. I think that there have been rumors that some people had to leave the screening for after 15 minutes, for example. But it is important to actually fight against the atrocities of this terrorist organization. And we need to actually think about how do we face this evil. And I think that all considerations have to go aside, or have to be put aside, because there has to be protection of the families of the victims. But this is something unacceptable that has been actually committed, and we ought to request earthly justice. But in the environment such as the Middle East and Gaza, which is in the hands of a terrorist movement, it almost appears that the standard justice, so to speak, will not have a chance. So in this sense, it is our obligation and duty to support the the government of the State of Israel to support all activities. Not specific, but it was actually said to us that all the perpetrators of these terrible atrocities will be punished, no matter how long it will take to bring them to justice. So, not all of them will probably go or get in front of the court, and then the survivors will have to be confronted with what they had done to them and how they did it. And for a civilized society and for legal orders that we have been building, that we are defending, that we are discussing, that's something hard to imagine. It's difficult for me, being a democratic politician, to say that, but this is my experience from this visit. It was a very strong experience. We are the ones who actually are bearing the load, and we need to know how to react. We need to distinguish between the cause and the consequence. And if a terrorist organization is ruling the entity called Gaza, then we need to deroot the terrorist movement. We need to create a peace system, which will be very complicated to create, for people who will wish to live there, and to ensure for them, as well as for Israelis, that something like this will never ever happen again. And I think this is our role, this is our destiny, this is our political obligation, and this is something that we need to argument about in Europe with all our partners. And I think that Europe has reacted very well at the very beginning of the crisis, and only then the political reality of some of the countries is actually moving this somewhere else, and the open decision making of the governments are actually being complicated by, let's say, thousands of supporters who are capable of supporting a brutal and inhuman terrorist movement that is called Hamas. So, I do apologize for being so lengthy in my description, but I'm actually full of experience. But for me, the ability to talk about it, not only in the interviews but also in front of you, it is something that I just need to experience in order to be able to handle. So thank you very much for your attention, and now it is actually up to us to continue with the formal acts. Thank you for your attention. Dear friends, I get a feeling that our conference has just acquired a new dimension. I'm very grateful for this communication and for sharing. I'd like to thank Member of the Parliament Žáček for sharing his experience, and I think all of us who are actually following it online. This is something of great importance for further positions that will be adopted. However, we are closing, we're getting to the end, and before I hand the floor over to Miloslav Janulík, the chairman of the parliamentary group of the Israeli Alliance Foundation in the Czech Parliament, I think the purpose of our meeting today has been defined in two sentences: to present legal arguments supporting the validity of relocation of embassies to Jerusalem according to the international law. And second, to extend the Prague Declaration, which will be read out, of the Israeli Alliance Foundation to parliaments of the entire world, with an appeal on their governments to relocate their embassies to Jerusalem. So, and now I kindly ask MP Janulík to read out the Prague Declaration of the Israeli Alliance Foundation Thank you very much for giving me the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to read out the Prague Declaration of the Israeli Allies Foundation Europe. The international conference that took place in the Parliament of the Czech Republic under the auspices of the chairperson of the Israeli Allies Foundation, Mr. Miloslav Janulík, under the auspices of Pavel Žáček, and the chairperson of the Czech Israeli Friends, Czech, hereby presents the Prague Declaration. First, Jerusalem is the indivisible capital of Israel, as referenced to in Israel's basic law, Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, adopted in 1980. Second, we recognize the historical and cultural significance of Jerusalem as the Jewish people's capital city and the fact that Jerusalem has only ever been the capital of the Jewish people. Third, we commend the Israeli government that since 1967 it has safeguarded the holy sites and has respected and protected religious freedom of all faiths to visit these sites and practice freely. 4. Each sovereign nation under the international law may designate its own capital. Therefore, we denounce discrimination against Israel and its appointed capital city, which is the only country in the world denied of the right to freely establish its own capital. Knowing of these facts, we adopt the following. We urge the parliaments of all the world to adopt resolutions calling on their respective governments to recognize the status of Jerusalem as the indivisible capital of Israel and to move their embassies to Jerusalem in recognition of this fact. Thank you. Dear friends, our conference is drawing to the close. It is truly becoming an historic event. And before we conclude, I'd like to use the historical shofar to first and foremost thank you, to give you blessings, and thirdly to express my wish for you to not to forget the nation and the country of Israel in your future life endeavors. Because we've been sitting for quite a long time and the refreshments are waiting. And before you move next door, please, let's convene here in the front. We'll put the Israeli and Czech flag and we'll take a family photo. So please proceed forward and let's take a family photo.
Nechceš zamávat? Takže si to zamávejme. Šalom. Pojďme zamávat, jo? Ano, to je pozdrav do Izraele. 3, 2, 1, teď. Ještě pořádně to zamávat. 3, 2, 1, teď.